Hello and welcome back to I Completed 80s Music, your weekly slice of the story of the best decade in pop. I'm your host, the ever-present 80s mixtaper, and prepare for another sojourn into the archives of the makeups, breakups, and all the fun bits in between. Today, we complete the back 6 tracks of Playlist 42 and the hot summer heat of June 1982. It's the first Connors-McEnroe final at Wimbledon, and in the charts we have Bow Wow Wow developing a sweet tooth, a flock of seagulls aiming for the stars, Queen going Spanish, Odyssey releasing their last hit, Shalamar giving us a night to remember, including the first recorded sighting of a very important dance move, and Leo Sayer brings us his heart to close the episode. Unfortunately, due to copyright laws, we can't play the songs on the show, but to circumvent this minor inconvenience, you'll find playlists for both Spotify and Apple Music in the episode description. And what I tend to do is have the podcast and Spotify open when I'm poddling about on a walk or just flick between the two, and it all works pretty well. Those playlist links will work on any major podcast platforms, but if you're on one where they're not supported, you will also find a full track listing in the episode description too. So without further ado, let's get back to the music. We start our diet of 80s music today with a band dining out on some recent success, and now they want something sweet. We last met the London new wave outfit Bow Wow Wow in January 1982. They were riding high on the success of Go Wild in the Country, a frantic rhythm-heavy track written by manager Malcolm McLaren alongside band members Matthew Ashman, Dave Barbarossa and Lee Gorman. That track peaked at number 7 on the UK singles chart. It was a chaotic summit of McLaren's primitive post-industrial ideology, featuring a young Annabella Lewin chanting over a wall of tribal percussion. It seemed like they had successfully weaponised the Burundi beat for the mainstream pop charts. But Malcolm McLaren was always looking for the next pivot, and a rivalry between the American and UK offices of their label RCA spurred the need for a radio-accessible record. RCA Records wanted something that could break the band in the United States. So the band was packed up and flown across the Atlantic to Miami, Florida. There, they paired with a producer who had just conquered the American charts with Joan Jett, Kenny Laguna. Laguna listened to the band's new material at Criteria Studios and told them flat out that he did not hear a radio hit for the US market. This admission deeply annoyed the band. Part of Laguna's production deal was that he got to bring one song choice to the party. He wanted a cover built entirely on a classic, undeniable rhythm. He chose a 1965 track written by Burt Burns, Bob Feldman, Jerry Goldstein and Richard Gotterer, originally recorded by them posing as an exotic band of Australian sheep farmers called the Strange Loves. True story. That song, believe it or not, was I Want Candy. This is track 8, Playlist 42. It is May 1982. RCA Record releases The Last of the Mohicans, a 4-track EP. The standout track and its lone single is I Want Candy. The story of how this track actually came together inside Criteria Studios is frantic pre-internet DIY improvisation. Producer Kenny Laguna ran into an immediate obstacle. He did not have a copy of the original 1965 record with him in Miami, meaning he lacked the exact lyrics and arrangement details. To solve this, in an era before digital search engines, Laguna placed a long-distance phone call from the studio to co-writer Richard Gotterer. Gotterer was in the middle of a recording session producing the Go-Go's album Vacation. Gotterer dictated the lyrics over the telephone line. Laguna then called him back a second time so Gotterer could sing the signature guitar lines directly down the phone to ensure the band duplicated the exact chordal hooks. The track's musical foundation relies on the classic syncopated Bo Diddley beat. Drummer Dave Barbarossa fused this foundational rock rhythm with his signature fast-paced Burundi tribal style, keeping the energy unflaggingly high. To give the instrumentation a heavier presence for American radio, Laguna applied a studio technique he used on Joan Jett's I Love Rock and Roll. He tracked an acoustic piano part directly underneath Matthew Ashman's guitar lines. Though mixed too low to be distinctly heard by the listener, the piano added a thick, rounded weight to every guitar chord. For the bass parts, Laguna decided to manufacture a high-energy stadium concert environment inside the control room to motivate the band. He moved bassist Lee Gorman's full live rig, consisting of 6 Mesa Boogie amplifier cabinets, into the back of the studio tracking space. He hooked up stage lights and invited Joan Jett, members of the Black Hearts and engineer Mark Dodson into the control room to scream, cheer and simulate a wild live crowd. Gorman turned his amplifiers up completely and nailed the final bass take in just a few passes. When the single dropped, RCA attempted a strange marketing experiment in the UK by releasing it as a one-sided laser-etched 7-inch single. The strategy required the band to take a royalty cut so the single could be sold to consumers at a lower price. However, UK record dealers refused to lower their shelf prices, selling the one-sided record at standard retail price anyway, forcing RCA to quickly abandon the formatting gimmick. Despite the retail distribution issues, the song climbed to number 9 on the UK singles chart. In America, it only managed to reach number 62 on the Billboard Hot 100, yet its true American longevity was secured by the newly launched MTV network. The music video, directed by Steve Kahn, featured the band members lounging on a beach and surfboarding, putting Lewin's striking Mohican hairstyle on full display. The constant video rotation turned I Want Candy into a permanent cult anthem of the 1980s new wave movement. However, this would prove to be their final hit. The visual power and radio saturation of I Want Candy gave the illusion of a band poised for global pop dominance. The reality behind the scenes was a rapidly accelerating collapse. The engine that Malcolm McLaren built out of subversion, youth culture, and intense rhythmic energy simply ran out of fuel under the pressures of the international music industry. Following the success of the Last of the Mohicans EP, the band recorded their second full-length album, When the Going Gets Tough, the Tough Get Going, released in 1983. Unlike their previous material, which was heavily dictated by McLaren, this record saw Annabella Lewin and guitarist Matthew Ashman co-writing the material in earnest. It had a dedication to the late actor and Bow Wow Wow fan John Belushi, who had passed recently. The band embarked on an intense, grueling promotional tour across the United States to support the record. The tour broke them physically and mentally. The band members suffered from severe physical exhaustion and frequent illnesses. Lewin, whose signature partially shaved mohawk left her highly vulnerable to catching colds during travel, was forced to cancel a handful of live performances to rest her vocal cords. These cancellations caused severe internal friction. The instrumental trio, Ashman, Barbarossa and Gorman, began plotting a new musical direction behind their frontwoman's back. They decided to move away from the tribal punk sound to form an electro-pop group called the Chiefs of Relief. However, they lacked the personal courage to confront their lead singer directly. In September 1983, while sitting at home during this supposed rest period, a 17-year-old Annabella Lewin found out she had been fired from her own band when she opened an issue of the New Musical Express and read the news in print. The sudden firing left Lewin in a precarious financial and professional position. The band's accountant immediately informed her that all of her income streams had completely stopped. Simultaneously, executives at RCA Records informed her that she still personally owed the label a full studio album under her existing contract. The original incarnation of Bow Wow Wow was done. The remaining instrumentalists transitioned into Chiefs of Relief, while Lewin eventually began a solo career. Decades later, Lewin and bassist Lee Gorman would occasionally resurrect the Bow Wow Wow name with new touring musicians for nostalgia concerts. But the lightning-in-a-bottle chaos of the original 4 members running wild in Criteria Studios was over. We say goodbye to them now. Next up, we last met the Liverpool quartet, a flock of seagulls, soaring on the unexpected neon-soaked slipstream of their global breakthrough smash, I Ran So Far Away, back in episode 38.5. The MTV cameras were fixed firmly on frontman Mike Score's gravity-defying waterfall-shaped haircut. It was a visual image so potent it threatened to swallow the actual musicality of the band whole. The industry quickly pinned them as a flash-in-the-pan novelty act. They were seen as a cartoonish blip of the early synth-pop explosion. But a band is rarely just its most outlandish hairstyle. Beneath the theatrical veneer lay a surprisingly intricate musical engine. It was driven by a young lead guitarist named Paul Reynolds. While the world expected another hyperactive synth-heavy gimmick, the band was quietly putting together something far more emotional, ethereal and enduring. It would prove they were capable of true sonic craftsmanship. This is Space Age Love Song, track 9. We return to the story of the band's fourth single from their self-titled debut album. Ironically, it did not even have an identity during its initial studio sessions. In a retrospective comment, guitarist Paul Reynolds recalled that the band simply could not find a suitable name for the composition. Reynolds noted that he suggested the title because the instrumental architecture sounded precisely like a space-age love song. The working phrase stuck. It became the permanent title, despite the words never appearing anywhere within Mike Score's lyrics. The lyrical meaning behind the track is grounded in human connection. Frontman Mike Score explained that the song explores raw intimacy and love at first sight. It captures the chemistry of making instant eye contact across a crowded room. The lyrics track this directly with lines like, "I saw your eyes and you made me smile." Unlike their debut hit, which leaned heavily into sci-fi imagery involving alien abductions, this song kept its focus entirely on the emotional impact of initial attraction. The defining element of the track is Paul Reynolds' masterful guitar style. Reynolds frequently played a distinct, heavily textured style utilising delay effect units. This created an atmospheric wall of sound. It added immense texture and motion to the overall melody. His signature ringing guitar riff became the emotional anchor of the track. This approach completely set the Seagulls apart from their purely keyboard-driven contemporaries at the time. The song was officially released by Jive Records on the 28th of May 1982. It achieved international commercial success. In the United Kingdom, it entered the charts and reached a peak position of number 34. In the US, the single debuted on the Billboard Hot 100 in mid-November. It eventually reached its peak position at number 30 on the 12th of February 1983. It enjoyed a lengthy 18-week run on the American charts. To support the release, director Tony Van Den End filmed a music video at the Danceteria nightclub in New York City. The performance-style video featured the band members miming the song against a backdrop that included the venue's location. In 2018, the original lineup reunited to re-record the track alongside the Prague Philharmonic Orchestra for their orchestral album Ascension. This project proved that its melody remains a timeless piece of art. For our track 10 today, we are back with Messrs Mercury, May, Taylor and Deacon. The last time we encountered Queen, it was late 1981, would you believe, episode 32.5, and they were riding the high of a monumental collaboration. They had teamed up with David Bowie in Montreux, Switzerland to give us Under Pressure, a bassline-driven funky work of art. It was, of course, an enormous commercial success, cementing their status as chameleons capable of conquering any sonic landscape, even disco and funk. But what happens right after you scale that mountain? You look for a different kind of terrain. For Queen, that meant moving their operations to Musicland Studios in Munich, Germany, under the steady hand of producer Reynold Mack. They decided to lean heavily into the danceable, bass-heavy rhythm and blues textures that were dominating the European club scene. They were building an album called Hot Space. This creative evolution did not sit perfectly with everyone in the band, nor did it align smoothly with their traditional guitar-loving rock fan base. Tension was brewing in the studio, fueled by different creative directions and a fracturing of their collaborative workflow. Yet, amidst this shift towards synthesizers, funk and electronic beats, there was still a craving for something grandly cinematic, sweeping and traditional. Guitarist Brian May sat down at a keyboard. He later noted that he wrote best when not on guitar, stating that you get the most perspective on a song when you are on an instrument you are not accustomed to, because your fingers naturally fall into different patterns. He began crafting a ballad that felt less like a nightclub and more like a stadium illuminated by thousands of lighters. It was a song that retained the core romanticism of Queen, layered with acoustic drums and lush synth pads. That song was Las Palabras de Amor. This is track 10. Press play now. We are back. That was Las Palabras de Amor, or in English, The Words of Love, released as a single from Hot Space on the 1st of June 1982. The true story of this song begins during Queen's historic, groundbreaking stadium tours of South America in 1981. Brian May was deeply moved by the warmth of the culture and the profound affection of the Spanish-speaking audiences. He decided to channel that cross-cultural connection directly into a lyric. The track is delivered primarily in English, but it weaves in explicit phrases of affection in Spanish, transforming it into a universal plea for connection, hope, and love across borders. Musically, the song highlights Queen's studio versatility during a challenging era. While Freddie Mercury delivers the lead vocal, Brian May handled the heavy lifting in the arrangement. According to documentation on Queenpedia, May played the piano, the synthesizer, and both the acoustic and electric guitars, while also stepping up to sing the high harmony vocal line on the chorus. The single arrived at an incredibly fraught political moment. In June 1982, the UK and Argentina were actively engaged in the Falklands War. Releasing a British pop single featuring a chorus sung affectionately in Spanish was an accidental but poignant cultural touchpoint, offering a message of peace when international relations were at an absolute nadir. Despite the critical mauling Hot Space received for its disco-heavy track lists, Las Palabras de Amor performed respectably, peaking at number 17 on the UK singles chart. The band never actually performed the track live during Freddie Mercury's lifetime. Its only promotional presentation came on the 9th of June 1982 when Queen recorded a rare appearance on BBC's Top of the Pops. Filmed inside the studio without an audience shortly after their massive Milton Keynes Bowl show, the band members mimed to the track. Freddie wore a formal dinner tuxedo paired with trainers, delivering a static performance alongside May, who sat behind a grand piano. The song wouldn't be performed in front of an actual live crowd until the 20th of April 1992, when Italian singer Zucchero joined the remaining members of Queen to perform it at the Freddie Mercury tribute concert at Wembley Stadium. Next up, we return to the post-disco landscape. As we know, this was undergoing a violent seismic shift. The shimmering orchestral disco that dominated the late 70s has been dragged out to the alleys and left for dead by the American mainstream. But across the Atlantic, in the United Kingdom, we didn't get the memo quite yet. And so we returned to Odyssey one last time, a New York City vocal group built around the staggering soulful harmonies of sisters Lillian Lopez and Louise Lopez, alongside North Carolina native Bill McEachern. We last crossed paths with them in 1981 when they rode to number 4 on the UK singles chart with the triumphant Afrocentric soul jazz reimagining of Lamont Dozier's Going Back to My Roots. It was a track about stripping away the synthetic textures of modern life to find something elemental and pure. But pop music moves fast. By the time they enter the studio to record their 5th album, Happy Together, the band needs a sound that bridges the gap between classic soul vulnerability and the cold mechanical future of the 1980s dance floor. What they deliver next is some slow-burning, emotionally exhausted dance music. A song that sounds like a late-night phone call you know you shouldn't make. This is Inside Out. When considering Inside Out, you have to look at the bizarre cross-continental collage of talent assembled by producer Jimmy Douglas. Douglas was an Atlantic Records studio veteran who had engineered for legends like Aretha Franklin, but he knew how to construct a modern heavy funk groove. The song itself was written by an eccentric kilt-wearing Scottish singer-songwriter named Jesse Ray. Do Google him, it's worth having a look at the pictures. But when Douglas brought the composition to Odyssey, he didn't just give them a sheet of music, he built an absolute powerhouse studio band to bring it to life. If you listen closely to the rhythm track of Inside Out, you might experience a strange sense of déjà vu. It sounds explicitly like the Ohio funk powerhouse group Slave, specifically their 1980 anthem Watching You. This is not an accident. Douglas recruited Steve Arrington, the former lead singer and drummer for Slave, to play drums on the Odyssey session. To anchor the bottom end, they brought in Sandy Anderson, the bassist from the New York post-disco group Unlimited Touch. Anderson was instructed to explicitly emulate the aggressive, thumb-slapping style of Slave's legendary bassist Mark Adams. Combined with the staccato squiggly synthesizers laid down by Unlimited Touch's keyboardist Lenny Underwood, the backing track became a heavy mechanical funk machine. But the true genius of the record lies in how Lillian Lopez navigates that massive, bruising groove. The lyrics of Inside Out describe a devastating state of emotional desperation. The narrator is calling an ex-lover who has already moved on to someone new. The opening line hits like a cold gust of wind when you're sitting on your own and you feel the city life surround you. Lillian Lopez delivers this performance not with the soaring, agile ecstasy of her earlier disco works, but almost with a tired, hollow and deeply poignant stoicism. Lillian counterbalances the mechanical rhythm with an incredibly warm vulnerability. The irony of Odyssey's career is that while they were a thoroughly American group from New York City, their native country largely turned its back on them during this era. Released in 1982, Inside Out only made a minor dent in the United States, peaking at number 12 on the Billboard Hot Black Singles chart. In the UK, however, it became a massive smash. The single climbed all the way to number 3 on the UK Singles chart, earning a silver certification. The British music press recognised its artistic weight immediately. The Enemy ranked Inside Out at number 15 on their prestigious Tracks of the Year list for 1982. But every monumental peak in pop music inevitably casts a long darkening shadow, and for Odyssey, Inside Out was the absolute edge of the cliff. The trajectory of a band that could once effortlessly command the transatlantic airwaves began to falter almost immediately after the Happy Together promotional cycle wound down. The friction of changing industry tides and diminishing commercial returns took a swift toll. Pop music in the mid-1980s was rapidly industrialising, moving away from the warm collaborative studio alchemy of veterans like Jimmy Douglas and toward hyper-programmed synthesizer-dominated pop. Odyssey, a group entirely anchored around the organic, powerhouse vulnerability of human vocal harmonies, found themselves increasingly out of step with the cold efficiency of the MTV era. Following the lacklustre commercial performance of subsequent singles, the ultimate blow came from the corporate boardrooms. RCA Records dropped the group from its roster, ending a foundational 5-album partnership. Stripped of major label backing and high-budget studio resources, the trio recorded one final studio album, Joy, in 1985. Released through the independent label Society Hill, the album's title track, Joy, I Know It, briefly surfaced as a minor UK chart entry, giving Lillian Lopez one final fleeting moment in the British spotlight. However, the major chart hits never returned. The original lineup gradually scattered as the realities of the music industry ground them down. While the Odyssey name would eventually be revived for the global nostalgia touring circuit, fronted in later decades by Lillian's son Stephen Colazzo, the golden era of the original trio had permanently passed. They remain a brilliant transient anomaly of the post-disco landscape, one of my personal favourites, bowing out on another great dance groove pressed to vinyl. Let's stick with the funk and soul themes for our penultimate track. We've met the American R&B and soul group Shalamar just once before, in early 1982. They had just released the post-disco ecstasy of I Can Make You Feel Good. The trio, vocalist Howard Hewitt, singer Jody Watley and dancer vocalist Jeffrey Daniel, were the undisputed crown jewels of Dick Griffey's Solar Records, the sound of Los Angeles Records. But inside the studio, the air was growing heavy. The assembly line perfection of the solar hit machine, masterminded by producer Leon Silvers III, was beginning to strain under the weight of internal politics and the relentless pressure to follow up a smash. They found it in A Night to Remember. This is track 12. A Night to Remember was not written by the group members. Instead, it was crafted by a powerhouse trio of songwriters, Dana Myers, Charmaine Silvers and Nidra Beard, who was a member of the label's fellow stablemates Dynasty, who we met all the way back in the very first episode. In fact, it was the very first song of this podcast. Leon Silvers III engineered a post-disco groove constructed around a formidable driving bass line played by James Ingram, the session multi-instrumentalist, alongside keyboardist Joey Gallo, rhythm guitarist Ricky Silvers and drummer Ed Green. The track served as the second single from Shalamar's sixth studio album Friends, released in February 1982. Vocally, the track features a unique dynamic. While Howard Hewitt usually commanded the lion's share of lead vocals for Shalamar, A Night to Remember is built on a shared conversational lead performance between Howard Hewitt and Jodie Watley. They sing about a love that is natural, unforced and completely devoid of demands. In the official music video, Shalamar depicts a narrative where Watley and Hewitt enjoy a romantic date, while Jeffrey Daniel plays their bartender maitre d' and room service attendant. But behind the scenes, the romance lay elsewhere. Jodie Watley was in a relationship with the group's producer, Leon Silvers III. The pair had been engaged and shared a daughter born in 1980. However, the relationship fractured when Watley discovered Silvers was also engaged to his fellow Dynasty member, A Night to Remember co-writer, Nidra Beard. This added a heavy layer of unspoken real-world friction to the Friends recording sessions. When the single dropped, the American market was somewhat cool to it. A Night to Remember debuted on the Billboard Hot 100 on April the 10th, 1982, eventually stalling at a modest number 44 and spending 10 weeks on the chart. It found its domestic core audience on the specialised charts, climbing to number 15 on the Billboard Dance Club Play Singles chart and hitting number 8 on the Hot R&B Black Singles chart. The United Kingdom, however, loved the track. The song rocketed up the charts, entering the top 10 and peaking at number 5. The defining moment of the song's legacy occurred on June the 24th, 1982, on the BBC television show Top of the Pops. And this is an incredibly special but oft unseen 80s moment, because a pregnant Jodie Watley was unable to travel abroad to promote the single. Jeffrey Daniel flew to London and appeared alone on the show. Instead of lip-syncing, he performed a solo dance routine to the track. It was during this specific broadcast that Daniel introduced British television audiences to the backslide, a street dance move he had mastered as a standout dancer on America's Soul Train. In the UK, this performance became an overnight cultural phenomenon. It was the public introduction of the move that the world would soon come to know universally as the moonwalk, popularised globally a year later by Jeffrey Daniels' close associate and student, Michael Jackson. They would chart highly again with the follow-up single There It Is, but despite the massive success of the Friends album, the classic lineup of Shalamar was rapidly fracturing. Frustrated by financial disputes with label boss Dick Griffey and facing immense pressure from the group regarding her pregnancy, Jodie Watley officially left Shalamar in 1983, with Jeffrey Daniel exiting the same year. Watley would go on to launch a highly successful solo career, winning the Grammy Award for Best New Artist in 1988. A Night to Remember remains the definitive peak of their collaborative power, a sophisticated post-disco soul hit that would stay with us forever. We end today on Playlist 42 with some Leo Sayer. We last met Leo Sayer in 1980, when he climbed all the way to number 2 on both the US and UK charts with his cover of the Crickets' More Than I Can Say. That was way back in episode 11 for those who would like to enjoy some of the old pod. That song was a global juggernaut, certified gold in America, cementing his place as a premier interpreter of soft rock longing. But pop music at the dawn of the 1980s was an unforgiving, fast-shifting landscape. The era of pure radio-friendly acoustic balladry was, let's just say, struggling, amidst the cool Spandaus, Durans, and shortly Culture Club's Whams and Tears for Fears. Sayer needed to evolve, or at least find a way to make his trademark emotional intensity cut through a denser, sharper sonic palette. He needed a team that understood how to engineer a modern hit. So he went to the undisputed kings of late 70s melodic drama, the Bee Gees, and paired them with a producer who knew exactly how to bridge the gap between soulful R&B and commercial pop. What they came up with was Heart Stop Beating in Time. This is track 13, our final song today. Heart was released in June 1982. This was the second single from Sayer's 9th studio album, World Radio, an LP that marked his 10th consecutive top 50 entry in the UK albums chart. The song itself was written by the powerhouse brotherhood of Barry Robin and Maurice Gibb in 1981, during an era when they were actively funneling first-rate pop material to other major solo voices. To bring this track to life, Sayer collaborated with the legendary producer Arif Mardin, the master arranger for Atlantic Records. Mardin brought a heavy dose of premium American session talent into the mix. If you look at the technical credits for this recording, you are looking at a who's who of West Coast studio royalty. The driving, impeccable rhythms were anchored by drummer Jeff Porcaro and bassist Abraham Laboriel. The glittering sharp guitar work came courtesy of Toto's own Steve Lukather, while Michael Bodiker and Robbie Buchanan handled synths. To elevate the chorus, the backing vocals featured Richard Page and Steve George, the vocal core of what would soon become the mid-80s chart-topping band Mr. Mister, alongside Marcy Levy. Despite this immense concentration of musical talent, the song did not replicate the massive US chart heights of Sayer's 1970s peaks. However, it found a solid foothold across the Atlantic. In the UK, the single debuted at number 73 on the UK singles chart on the 13th of June 1982. It climbed steadily, entering the top 40 at number 38, and eventually secured its peak position at number 22 on the 18th of July, spending a total of 10 weeks on the UK chart. In Ireland, the track performed slightly better, peaking at number 17 during a 6-week run. Heart captures Sayer trying to find his footing at a critical juncture, navigating the bridge between the analogue warmth of his early career and the digital, sleek, synthetic polish of the 80s. It also gives us an eye on the pop craftsmanship of the Gibb brothers and the meticulous, golden-eared production of Arif Mardin. But this transitional era for Sayer was setting the stage for an even more deeply personal, emotionally raw chapter. The slick studio polish would soon fracture under the weight of real-world heartbreak and marital collapse. When we next visit Leo Sayer for our final look at his charting career, we will find him standing outside in the cold, holding a public telephone, pouring his actual life into a desperate plea called Orchard Road. So that is your lot today. What a playlist and what a lot of breakups. But that, folks, is a constant feature of the decade. Not many groups make it through unscathed. And as we shall see in playlist 43, the more things change, the more things stay the same as more groups begin to fracture, but in the process, make way for new names later on in the year. For the first half of playlist 43, we move into late June 1982. Bucks Fizz get all misty-eyed with a near a cappella vocal performance which gets them Ivor Novello nominated. Dollar released the last of the Trevor Horn tracks. The Steve Miller Band cast a spell on us. Roxy Music released the third and final instalment of the Yuppie Sex trilogy. And then Gary Newman takes us to bed. The Clash come back rocking, and we end with the Four Tops taking us back to school. If you like what you're hearing, please do go out of your way to support the show and drop me a coffee on my Buy Me a Coffee link in the episode description. And do remember to like and subscribe too. Anyone who buys me a coffee will have their name roasted by me as I place you in an 80s band. Anyway, hope you have a wonderful week, and we'll see you here next time on I Completed 80s Music. Take care.